I want to begin by acknowledging that this House sits on the ancestral lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are enthusiastic early adopters to technology. Time and time again, they have readily embraced the wide variety of broadcasting services available to them, foreign and domestic. These broadcasting services empower consumers with the ability to watch what they want, whenever they want it, and however they want it. And the same goes for listening to music and hearing the news. Bill C-10 won't limit the ability of Canadians to access the programming platforms of their preference. Rather, it will ensure that the Canadian broadcasting system continues to meet the needs of Canadian consumers. The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission is the independent regulator of Canada's broadcasting systems. It requires television stations, radio stations, and cable and satellite distributors to support the creation and the display of Canadian stories and Canadian music. These are requirements that have been in place for decades and have resulted in greater investment and promotion of Canadian content and talent, including high-quality journalism, groundbreaking musical artists, and compelling and acclaimed programming. However, in the current regulatory framework, online broadcasters are exempt from the most broadcasting regulations. In other words, they're not required to contribute to the Canadian broadcasting system as is required by the traditional broadcasters. And this is because the last time major changes were made to our Broadcasting Act was in 1991, before we experienced the new digital age and its challenges. But, Mr. Speaker, we're well into the digital age now, and it's time for our legislation to join us. It's time for online broadcasters to be treated the same as traditional broadcasters. Bill C-10 creates a level playing field where all broadcasters have a fair chance to compete by ensuring that online broadcasters are subject to the same regulatory framework. Most importantly, it ensures that both traditional and online broadcasters contribute to a healthy and a vibrant Canadian broadcasting system. For Canadian artists, this means securing sustainable funding that will allow them to continue telling stories and making music from a uniquely Canadian perspective. For most consumers, this means the ability to access more content that will allow Canadians to see themselves, their communities, and their stories reflected through different points of view. For Canada, it means a stronger cultural unity, a shared national identity, and more inclusive society. By presenting the content that is representative of different cultures, communities, and languages from across Canada, broadcasting provides a window into the diverse experiences of Canadians. 78% of Canadians consider made-in-Canada content to be of importance to them personally. It's clear that Canadians see value in their stories on the screen and in hearing Canadian artists on the radio. And I'm proud to say that the interest in Canadian content exists far beyond our borders. The hit show, Schitt's Creek, recently brought home 9 Emmys. The film Indian Horse won an award at the 2018 San Diego International Film Festival. And Quebec native Celine Dion is one of the best worldwide selling artists of all time. And the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. Including online broadcasters in the broadcasting regulatory framework could result in online broadcasters being requested to invest more than $800 million in our creators, our music, and stories by 2023. It could result in more Canadian successes being enjoyed and recognized abroad. Whether getting traffic and weather updates or learning about the day's events from primetime broadcasts, the broadcasting system is an important source of news for Canadians. Traditional broadcasters have long supported journalism and the delivery of local, regional, and national news. By including a new policy objective that promotes the provisions of news, including those produced by Canadians, and reflecting Canadian perspectives from a variety of sources, we are strengthening the role of news in the broadcasting system. Recognizing that a free and independent press is the cornerstone of our democracy, this bill does not contemplate the licensing of news organizations. However, the bill does create an equitable framework for broadcasting that will help safeguard the news production. This way, traditional broadcasters, who are important sources of news, and particularly local, would be better able to compete with online broadcasting services. The bill was also crafted to keep both online and traditional broadcasting services affordable to Canadians. Because we understand every day Canadians are making difficult choices on how to spend their hard-earned dollars, this is especially true during these trying times. Bill C-10 provides the CRTC with the ability to tailor regulatory requirements to specific business models. For example, the CRTC could impose mandatory Canadian programming expenditures on services that are already in the business of commissioning and producing content. Requiring services such as Netflix and Crave to spend a certain amount of money each year on Canadian content will help us move the needle on directing investments towards programming that is created and produced by Canadians for Canadians. This will help the CRTC to avoid imposing undue regulatory burden on a particular service that would then result in raised prices for consumers. These, Mr. Speaker, are just some of the ways that Bill C-10 will benefit Canadian consumers, creators, and artists. The exemption for digital services was originally put into place to allow for innovation and development of the new online media services. But now, in 2020, when Canadians mostly access programming online, these exemptions no longer make sense. The inclusion of online broadcasters in the Canadian broadcasting system with regulatory clarity promotes the entrance of new players into the Canadian market. It supports a vibrant and a healthy competition in the sector, creating additional pressures to keep costs down. For Canadian consumers, it leads to a wider variety of high-quality content with a greater diversity of views in which Canadians proudly see themselves and their stories. After nearly 30 years, Mr. Speaker, it's time to modernize our broadcasting system and to safeguard it for the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. Question and commentaire. The honourable member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, workers in the broadcasting industry and our Canadian cultural workers are struggling. And for many, time is running out. So why does this bill punt the problem to the CRTC, which means it could take almost a year before we see any real change? This government has a tendency of making promises and then kicking the can down the road, and they've done this with some of the most pressing issues of our time. Today, the government tabled a climate accountability bill that doesn't have any real accountability measures for 10 years. They say they support pharmacare, but when? It is so important that we support our cultural workers and our workers in the broadcasting industry. If the Liberals truly want to fix their disastrous Netflix deal, why not do it now?
Honourable member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I don't agree with the terminology of kicking the can down the road. The CRTC was an organization that was established to focus on the industry and to do what's important for the industry in the interests of Canadians. So having this bill directed towards the CRTC and having these corrections in the hands of the CRTC is the appropriate place for it to be. I would liken it to going to see a surgeon when surgery is required, as opposed to going to a general practitioner. And what we're doing here is we're relying on an organization that has the strength, the intelligence, and the experience to deal with the organization. to deal with.
Questions and comments? Qu'est-ce commentaire?
The honourable member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What is the government waiting for? I think our questions are legit. There was the medical assistance in dying legislation, but Quebec is ahead of the game on that. And since January 28th, the sales tax has been collected on the web giants, but the feds are doing nothing about this, but they are able to build a pipeline. And in 2019, they added Amazon and Facebook. They're all collecting sales tax in Quebec. So what does this bill do about it? Nothing. There's nothing in this bill that would cover the web giants and make them pay their fair share, and also to provide for local content, CanCon. Now, obviously, culture is not very important to the Liberals, but my question is clear. What are the Liberals waiting for? Why aren't they taxing web giants? Are we going to have to wait for another pipeline or miss the boat again? The honourable member for Newmarket Aurora.
Thank the honourable member for his question. I think what we're doing is trying to move this bill forward, and there's an opportunity when this bill goes to committee to listen to the suggestions that we have here. I'm all for collaboration. I'd like to see us have the benefit of your perspective, but let's do that in committee and let's implement that as we move the bill forward. So we want to go ahead. All we need is to have the vote to take it to committee and start getting to work on this. Let's work together on it.
Questions and comments, and we're going by video conference to the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my honourable colleague for Newmarket Aurora. I listened to the speech, and I'm very interested in C-10 and seeing it get to committee. But he made the point that this treats the live streaming digital giants in the same way that we would treat other parts of our economy. And I want to ask him if we don't need an amendment to direct that in the case of outfits like Twitter and Facebook that are actually gutting our Canadian journalism, that they be treated as publishers and not this fiction, that they are platforms. Then all the rules of libel and slander, et cetera, would apply to them.
Member for Newmarket Aurora.
Again, I thank the honourable member for a great question. I think you raised some really good points, and I think that's why it's important for us to get into committee to hear that type of input so that we can build a better bill. The issue, and the minister has said, is that he would welcome the other perspectives, we would welcome amendments, and we would welcome collaboration so that we can move forward into the 20th century.